Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm very pleased, very excited to welcome you all and to have today this very important moment, this conference called Disrupt to Protect Fighting Labor Exploitation Through Innovation, conference that has been organized in the framework of our INVERT project. And my name is Antonio De Martin. I'm Senior Project Manager at Victim Support Europe. I will be co-hosting the event. Today I will have this important task. I will also be joined later by my colleague Clara Rondani in co-hosting the event. I'm representing Victim Support Europe, that is one of the partners of this important project that we're concluding today. And Clara is representing, together with her colleague, Transcrime, and that is the coordinator of this project. I will Before we proceed, I would like to just give a special heartfelt thank you to the Permanent Representation of Malta for hosting us, for this continued cooperation that we have. It's not the first time we're here. It's always a pleasure. And it's also, I think, quite the testament or the proof of the centrality and importance that is given to this very topic, the topic of victims and how we can combat crime together. So thank you again, and I hope that we're going to be having other chances to cooperate in the future. The goal of today's conference, I would say, is twofold. The first one is to explore current trends, the impact of human trafficking for labor exploitation, and the challenges, the complexities and the challenges when it comes to addressing it. The second part is, for me, more important and more practical and very much embodies what we have tried to do with our project. That is, the intent is to provide answers. The intent is to illustrate and show in practical terms how key actors involved in investigating and combating human trafficking for labor exploitation can be better equipped, capacitated to face this big challenge. As you will see, we have some very concrete tools, solutions that we developed, we tested, we observed in terms of outcomes and results, and we would like to share them with you. We would like to tell you a little bit more about this, and perhaps to also collect from you some of the feedback that I'm sure you will have for us. The conference is structured in three main segments. We will start, of course, after the introductory speeches with, then we have two keynote speeches that are aimed at setting the terms and framing the key issues of our discussion. We then have a presentation of the INVERT project, its objectives, outcomes. In particular, we will be paying particular attention to the dimension of indicators that have been developed through the project, the process that was behind it, and why these indicators we think are really important in informing the way we work when it comes to investigating, when it comes to combating human trafficking for labor exploitation. The second part of this second segment is a live demonstration of how the two tools that I was referring to, two risk assessments that have been developed for law enforcement agencies and prosecutors to use during investigations, function, work, and how, and we would like to have a discussion with you on how this can be also refined, fine-tuned, improved. I'm sure there is space for that as well. Then we have a presentation of the results of this very exercise that we did in piloting them in two different countries, in Hungary and in Italy. And it will be followed by a Q&A session with the professionals who tested these tools and had the opportunity to evaluate the practical impact of these tools. We are also joined, it's not just us today, we're also joined by a good number of people online. Last time I checked, it was around 40. We had 90 registrations, so welcome to you here in person. Very, very happy to have you with us, and welcome to the persons online as well. Before we proceed, just a couple of housekeeping rules for safety and in general, in the event of a fire alarm, the fire alarm will operate, and we will, in the event of a fire, the fire alarm will operate, and we will immediately evacuate the building. So please exit the venue using the emergency stairs to the left of the elevator. Coffee and lunch will be provided in this room. So we'll have a coffee break around 11:30, I guess, and then lunch after the event. The toilets are in the hallway. The closest, I believe, is outside of the room on the right. And in order to adhere to the time limits, our timekeeper, Onya, here on the left, will use timekeeping signs to our speakers when the time is running out. So I think we can now begin with our introductory speeches and to set the tone a little bit of the discourses today. I would then invite our first speaker of the day, Levent Altan, Executive Director of Victim Support Europe, to join us. Thank you.
It's too tall for me. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to see you all here. I think it's been 2 years of hard work and lots of success and some difficulties on the way, but the fact that we've got here and had such great successes, I think, is a great testament to you all. I won't be very long. I just wanted to maybe give some context and some broader vision of why VSC, and I think why we're all here today and why we've been working together. For those who don't know VSC, especially those online, we're a European network, the leading network, I would say, working for all victims of crime. And we specialize on specific groups, such as on human trafficking victims. And our network and our members consist of NGOs, but also governmental organizations and academic institutes. And together they serve around 3.5 million victims every year. So we have a very strong and specific focus on not only developing the laws, policies, and supporting governments to do that, but also ensuring that those laws are put into practice. And I think that's why this project has been so important. We've spent the last 10 years as Victim Support Europe developing a strong framework, and we're trying to embed that in all of the practitioners who work with victims. And what that means is ensuring that we address the needs of victims, all 5 needs. That's the need to be treated with respect and dignity, to be protected, supported, to have access to justice, which is critical for this project, and also to be compensated. That's an essential element, but we also have to address the impacts of crime. We have to also identify the challenges that victims and practitioners face when they're doing their job to help victims. And we do that in a victim-centric way, and that means listening to victims, empowering them, giving them choice. That's the essential elements of what we all need to do, no matter how we're working and why we're working with victims. But we're now into a new phase in the last few years of really embedding that knowledge into the practice. And I think just a couple of months ago, I was in a Belgian conference here in Brussels with around 400 judges, prosecutors, labor inspectors, and others specifically working on human trafficking. I think the things we've discovered in this project and have known for a while, they are also expressing the challenges of identifying organizations, the challenges of building a case against prosecutors, the knowledge that the victim is an essential element in successful prosecutions, and the understanding that we have to work effectively with victims. This is what this project has really been about, building these two together. This is, I think, what makes these projects unique, is that it's not just about prosecution, it's not just about identification, but it's about helping victims and working with them because they deserve that, because they have the right to that, but also because it's essential to the success of your jobs as prosecutors, police officers, labor inspectors. That's what's been so important, and the partnership has been really important. We've invested a lot of time in the last 10 years building these partnerships, and I'll be honest, in the last few years, it's becoming more and more challenging. There are more and more governments which are questioning the legitimacy of civil society and its role in influencing the way that our societies as a whole function. We won't step back from our job. We'll continue to work with you because we see the success. We'll continue to advocate because we do that in an evidence-based way, and we see that civil society and frontline practitioners and governments working together is the best way of working for victims. And I think this project is a demonstration of that. We've been able to research, we've been able to consult, we've been able to build a strong evidence base, and then we've tested the products, innovative, new, different products which are designed with practitioners in mind, and they're tested. And I think that's down to all of you, down to that collaboration, and fundamentally it's down to building trust. So that's why I greatly appreciate your presence here today. It's one thing to work on projects, it's another to be together, get to know each other, and really establish that trust. Because the product, the tools that we build is just one part of it. It's how those tools are used. And when all of you go out and when we spread those tools to other practitioners and other partners, that's just one part of it. It's how you then come together and how we work with you when we've identified those victims and ensured that they're supported, ensured that they can reintegrate into society. So I hope you have a wonderful day today. I hope you learn lots. I hope you really contribute. We never stop trying to improve, trying to innovate, and trying to make any of these tools as relevant as possible. So this continues that process. I look forward to speaking to you all later today. Thank you.
All right, so next up, let me welcome our second speaker, introductory speaker of the day from our INVERT consortium, Francesco Calderoni, full professor at the Faculty of Criminology, Catholic University, Italy, and in Milan, and senior researcher at Transcrime. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here in presence, and those who are online. It's a pleasure to be here after 2 years of intense work on this INVERT project. Now, just a few words about the project. It lasted 2 years, funded by DG Home under the ISF program. And I'm a professor of criminology, as Antonio mentioned, at Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore. I'm a researcher at Transcrime since a few years now, and it's a pleasure to collaborate with so many great partners and institutions beyond Victim Support Europe. Of course, we had Arma dei Carabinieri, OSDIFE, OCRI, and the Prosecutor's Office of Milan and Palermo, and it was a very valuable opportunity to collaborate. Why was particularly valuable? Of course, as a representative of the coordinator, it's normal that I say, oh, this was a great project. But I really think it was, because normally for us, for the researchers, we think we come out with good ideas, and then we go out and present them to the prosecutors and police, and they normally say, yeah, but we already do that, or we would need something more, and it's not really operational, it's not deployable. What I really liked about this project is that the tools that we developed, which is a risk assessment for assessing the risk that companies are involved in labor exploitation, and a tool for assessing whether individuals, persons, are victimized by labor exploitation. These are two operational tools. We developed it, we deployed them, and our partners, they tested them in an operational setting. So we don't know exactly what they did, because of course we didn't have access to information that they normally deal with, but I think it was a very good opportunity to bridge the distance that very often separates academia and researchers and practitioners and law enforcement agencies. So I think this was a great opportunity, and of course at the end of the project we also always wonder, where do we go now? Well, for us, at least for Transcrime and Università Cattolica, we're already working on other proposals and idea on the topic of labor exploitation, because we truly believe this is a very interesting challenge for the current environment, the current days we live in, especially from Italy. We've been seeing many investigations recently also, and many cases that somehow shed a very dramatic light on what's going on in our society, how people work and the conditions they work in, and the challenges they face. So I think this is interesting. It's not normal labor exploitation. I've been experiencing that has increasingly attracted attention from policymakers and from politicians too. I think that's a very welcome development. Italy, very often the public debate is pretty much about mafia crimes, organized crime, major corruption scandals, but then I really think that these investigations in the field of labor exploitation are somehow making a change on people's everyday life. So personally and on behalf of Università Cattolica, I thank you all for being here, and I really look forward to the discussion and to your feedback about the tools that we have developed. And if you're interested in moving forward, we're here. The tools are there, and we just need somebody else who wants to test them and maybe give us some suggestion to make them even better. So thank you very much.
And finally, our last address, introductory address. This comes from another person that couldn't be here today, but is also part of the consortium. It was mentioned we have, as part of the consortium, OCRI, the National Institute of Criminology in Hungary. So we have a video from Dr. Andrea Tunde Barabas, and she wanted to share some thoughts with us, and I think we can now start it. Thank you very much.
Short OCRI, to address you today at the closing event of the INVERT project. This moment marks not only the conclusion of a successful international collaboration, but also a celebration of shared commitment, expertise, and progress in the fights against human trafficking. Let me begin by introducing our institution. OCRI is Central Europe's leading criminological research institute. Founded in 1960, it served as the academic research and training center of Hungary's prosecution service. Our mission is to conduct high-quality research on crime to develop both the theoretical and practical foundation of criminology, forensics, and penal law, and to ensure that our findings are translated into meaningful action. We strive to provide reliable, evidence-based information to decision-makers, practitioners, supporting the judicial system, and contributing to crime prevention. Our work is driven by a belief in the power of knowledge to create safer, fairer societies. Now, I would like to say a few words about the phenomena of human trafficking in Europe and the main goals of the INVERT project. Human trafficking is one of the most complex and deeply troubling phenomena of our time. It wears many faces, including forced labor, labor exploitation, servitude, and modern slavery. These are not just legal definitions, they represent real human suffering, systemic injustice, and the urgent need for coordinated actions. The INVERT project has placed this issue at the center of its efforts, focusing specifically on the exploitation phase of trafficking, where victims are most vulnerable, and where criminal networks profit the most. The INVERT project was born from a shared vision. In March 2022, Transcrime approached OCRI with a proposal to jointly develop a project under the Internal Security Fund. The goal was ambitious, to create two risk assessment tools, one company-focused, the other victim-focused, that could help disrupt the financial mechanism of trafficking during the exploitation phase. These tools were designed for use by prosecution offices and law enforcement agencies across Europe. Today, we can proudly say that this goal has been achieved. The INVERT project has delivered a prototype suite of tools that will strengthen investigation, improve victim identification, and ultimately help dismantle the business model of trafficking. But the project goes beyond tools. It also aims to enhance international cooperation and capacity building among prosecution and law enforcement agencies, to foster a shared understanding of labor trafficking involving both adults and children. PR2 promote a proactive, intelligence-led approach to tackling exploitation. OCRI also played an important role in the project, especially in the field of training activities. Between July 2023 and May 2025, OCRI and our partners carried out a wide range of activities. Our institute was responsible for Work Package 4, which focused on training sessions. We compiled and analyzed existing knowledge on labor exploitation, drawing from international, European, Italian, and Hungarian statistics and experiences. Our goal was to inform and empower law enforcement professionals, to sensitize them to the realities faced by victims, and to prepare them to use the INVERT tools effectively. We summarized it in a training manual, which is available in English and in Hungarian on our website. I am especially proud to announce that OCRI organized the first joint training session for Hungarian prosecutors, police officers, and labor inspectorates last October. Nearly 50 professionals participated, gaining valuable insight into each other's work and strengthening interagency cooperation. This event was a milestone not only for the INVERT project but for Hungary's broader efforts to combat trafficking. As we close this chapter, let us not forget that the fight against human trafficking is far from over. The INVERT project has equipped us with new tools, new knowledge, and new partnerships. Up to us to carry this momentum forward, to apply what we learned to continue building bridges across borders, and to remain steadfast in our commitment to justice. Let me thank all of our partners, contributors, and supporters. Your dedication has made this project a success. And to all of you here today, thank you for being part of this journey. Together, we have taken a meaningful step toward disrupting exploitation and protecting a dignity of those who are most vulnerable, not just in Hungary, but all over Europe. I wish you pleasant discussion and joint thinking. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you to the three introductory speakers for their warm welcome and for just sharing their views on the very important task that we took on in implementing this project, and also giving us a sense of what is the way forward, what we can expect, what is possible in that sense. I would like now to gradually transition to one of the core parts and segments of our conference, that is the one where we have two keynote speakers that will help us setting the context, understanding or getting an overview and a better sense of some of the trends that are relevant to our discussion. As I mentioned before, also the complexity, the challenges, the obstacles that we are here to face, and we hope we're going to be having some good answers to. So please let me now proceed and welcome our first keynote speaker, Dr. Aitana Radu. Aitana is a lecturer and a security research coordinator within the Department of Information, Policy and Governance at the University of Malta. In this very domain, she has advised over the years the Council of Europe, the UN, and Maltese authorities, and currently coordinates, among others, the EU-funded Disrupt project, has actually recently finished, where also Victim Support Europe is partner, and whose primary goal is to combat child trafficking. Aitana also has extensive experience in training practitioners across justice, law enforcement, and social sectors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonio, and good morning. Clearly, today is a day of short people. I wanted to say that it's very nice for me actually to be in the permanent representation of Malta to the EU as somebody coming from the University of Malta. That does not happen very often. This being said, just to qualify, I am not Maltese, I'm Romanian, but I think that after living for 10 plus years in Malta, I feel like I have a right to take pride in being in this house today. One of the things that I wanted to speak today, when I was happy to speak today about labor trafficking and forced labor in general, is because the country that I live in, Malta, has a very high number of migrants who come all the time for different type of work. And this can be both third country nationals, like we would like to call them, who come under typical work permits or as part of family reunifications, or we still have a large number of refugees who come across the Mediterranean. So it's a country that for one reason or another has been faced with the issue of trafficking and exploitation for a long time. And I have not asked, but how does one change the slides? Yeah, okay, so we can change them even more. Okay, so just to remind everyone, because the issue with labor trafficking I find is that we often call it by many names. We say labor trafficking, we say forced labor, we say modern slavery, but they are not all the same thing. And why is it important is because when it comes to prosecution, especially and the type of approach we take as a society, each of them is different. So this is just a reminder that trafficking requires the actions, so the recruitment, the transportation, the means, coercion, deception, that leads to different types of exploitation. One of them being forced labor, but you can also have sexual exploitation, the removal of organs, and so on and so forth. And then if you go to the next slide, we see that this overlap. And this is something that I want to discuss today. I want to discuss today how some of these vulnerabilities actually bring together different components. So on one hand, we have the human trafficking element. On the other hand, we can have the forced labor. And on the other hand, we can have modern slavery. Because these are not, they are only in the academic world tightly knitted boxes. But in the real world, there's a lot of gray. And it is this gray that makes prevention and countering this phenomenon very difficult. So, go further. We see that the numbers in terms of reporting are still very small. So these are the Eurostat 2023 numbers, which are the latest ones. They are small because there's very little reporting in some of these cases. And we're still struggling, I think, across all the EU member states with identification of victims. And when we see things like labor trafficking increasing in the last years, or the number of cases have increased, what we see actually is probably an increase in reporting or in an efficient identification of victims. It's very difficult to say whether the phenomenon has increased because there are more cases or just reporting has increased because we detect more cases. So I think statistics can be misleading because on one hand we can say these are still small numbers, but how many of the actual victims are never identified? And I wanted to put some things here like citizenship, so many are non-EU, and gender distribution that mostly are men, because these are some of the intersectional challenges that I would like to talk today. So gender, citizenship, and how they all come together when it comes to labor trafficking. Okay. And first and foremost, when it comes to thinking of vulnerabilities in this intersectional framework, is the legal status. So until recently, and I'm going to start with Malta, it offered 10 days for third country nationals who lost their job to apply for a new job. So in our case, residency is linked to work permit. 10 calendar days means that they were put in a very vulnerable situation, especially as most people would not even find out that they had lost their job. So the employer could not advise them directly, but they would find out actually when they would get the letter from authorities telling them that they need to leave the country unless they have another work permit, which means that most third country nationals were extremely afraid to lose their work, and they would accept any conditions, including having salary reduced or not having paid leave or any medical leave in order to not being deported. Of course, many of them would have taken big loans in their country of origin to come to work in Malta, and they had to pay off those loans, or they had family members who depended on them. That duration has changed now to 30 days, but it is still very little, especially considering that they might not find out, as I said, in day one, but 5-10 days into the process. Now, the duration of making a work permit takes around 3 to 4 months for it to be issued, which means that during that period, the person is not allowed to work. But living in Malta is expensive. That means that even if they apply for a new work permit for 3-4 months, they most likely will be pushed into an underground economy, because we say legally they don't have the right to work, so they shouldn't. But who can support themselves for 3-2 months, especially if they would have been employed in a basic employment with the minimum salary? So it is the legal framework itself and the procedures and the delays in these procedures actually that makes them vulnerable to be pushed into situations that can be very exploitative. Now, when it comes to trust and trauma, when it comes to trust especially, we see both the presence of too much trust and the presence of too little trust. So on one hand, we have cases of fraudulent employers who employ people who put their trust in them to bring them into the EU. And here I will give an example from my country of origin. 10 days before the deadline, 10 days before the deadline, the employer contacted me and said, "Can you please check with the authorities?" And I said, "Yes, of course." And they checked, and they found that People come with legal work permits to Romania, for example, and then they are persuaded by the same employers to sign a new contract where the name of the company is changed just slightly. So if it was called Aitana Ltd in one case, it would be called aitana.com, let's say in the second. And they are persuaded or coerced to move to another EU member state for work, thus moving from a position of legality into one of illegality, because their work permit would have been linked to residence in Romania, which is something that they might not be aware. So we see cases where even when it starts in a legal place, so people coming to work legally, they can end up being illegally moved to another country for work and exploited there once they realize that they are illegal, because once they are realized, then the elements that I mentioned before of coercion takes place. So first deception, then coercion, and then they find themselves in these exploitative situations. And then lack of trust. It is very unlikely for people who have vulnerable legal statuses or who come from other countries to go to report to the police. First, they fear authorities, they might not have sufficient knowledge of the language or of the services available or even the legislation available. And I can give you a small anecdote. Recently, we had the consultations with doctors when we were discussing victims' rights, and many of the primary care doctors in Malta expressed the concern that they are seeing individuals who suffer from different work-related injuries, who come to seek help, but when the doctor offers to give them a medical leave because the injury requires leave, they say, but I do not have the right to medical leave, or do not give me medical leave because the employer will fire me on the spot, and I work like 7 days a week, so there's no point, just give me some treatment. And of course, they realize that this is an exploitative situation, but as there is no mandatory reporting in the case of adult victims in our situation, they don't know what to do with that information because the person does not want to report. They as doctors have patient-doctor confidentiality, so therefore they're also in a difficult situation. And trauma, of course, a lot of these individuals, especially when it comes to refugees, have a lot of trauma that has come from their journey. A lot of abuse making them particularly vulnerable in general. Gender is important because, of course, we have intersectionalities here. People get discriminated because they are refugees and women at the same time. So labor exploitation and sexual exploitation go hand in hand. A lot of time people are brought in for can be trafficked for work, for example, in agriculture or other areas, and then they are also sexually abused or forced into sexual exploitation. So these are not two different areas, but there's often intersections, and when we think of it as only one thing, we miss the other. So it's very important to always consider both. When it comes to technology, of course, we know that it both facilitates recruitment and it facilitates exploitation. When it comes to recruitment, recently we prepared a data set for Interpol on migrant smuggling, and in the Telegram groups that are used to provide smuggling services for different categories of migrants, we also see that a lot of them are offering also false documents or legitimate claimed documents related to employment. So we see that the smuggling services often come in hand with this idea of transferring to another country for work, but we know that based on the nature of the group and the type of activity, so this is an organized crime-led group of smugglers, it is most likely the case that these work adverts are actually indicators of at best labor exploitation, but most likely they could end up in a situation of trafficking, being moved from country to country. This is on the recruitment side. On the exploitation side, we have seen through our work with the financial intelligence analysis units that this type of employers or organized crime who are managing such cases are very smart. So if in the past the individuals were not paid at all, they know that this will show because they need to be paid via bank transfer, at least in Malta. So they make the transfer, and then there's always a curve. They would ask for the money to be given back on the day of the salary, but that can also be seen as a pattern. So now they're asking for the money to be paid in cash in smaller amounts and given back. So if a person is paid 1,000 euros, then the employer asks back for, let's say, 100 of those 1,000 euros, but not in a one payment that is visible as a transaction, because they know that it would be monitored and it would come out as a pattern, but in smaller payments and often in cash, which would mark the normal pattern of perhaps expenditure of an individual, if they need to pay rent, if they need to, buy groceries, so it wouldn't come out immediately from a financial intelligence data set. Okay, last slide. And then we have a number of attempts and solutions that have been made, in our country included. For example, trying to do pre-departure awareness campaigns by warning people of the risk of being trafficked for labor or being just find themselves in exploitative situation. The problem with some of these campaigns is, of course, well, it's twofold. On one hand, it does not match the information collection patterns of migrants, so they often rely mostly on family or peers or people in their community for information. So when the campaign was done through embassies or through all sorts of other institutions in the country of origin, they disregarded that information as being just meant to discourage them, but not being so the impact was very low. And secondly, sometimes it does not consider the need that they have to search for work in other places, which the need can be higher than their sense of self-preservation. So even if they have concerns about the type of employment, or they might have higher stories, or they are reached by that information, they might still feel that there's a huge pressure on them to work and they can manage the situation by themselves or seek solutions once they are in the country of destination, so the EU member state. And therefore, this needs to be considered in awareness. Then when it comes to people who have been identified, something that we have struggled with, but not only us, is support for reintegration. So there is support for victims, of course. We have good shelters, we have people who offer this victim-centric services. But sometimes the support is short-term and it does not consider long-term needs. So we have shelters, but we don't have as many halfway houses, or not even halfway houses, but accommodation is really expensive if you're trying to convert professionally from the job that you have been brought in and might have been exploited in. And support for paying for that accommodation is not always or hardly ever available for long term until they manage to rebuild a life. And of course, they would not always want to go back. Then we have two more things that I think are really important. One is the fragmented information sharing. We see a lot of victims of labor trafficking in Malta. I unfortunately even had a colleague whose partner matched the criteria when it comes to their job. And they seek for help, but they do not go to the police. They seek for help for their problems. So they go to the social services. They might go to medical practitioners. They might go to somebody who has a bit of legal knowledge to advise them how best to handle the situation, but they don't officially report. If they don't officially report, they are not identified as a victim of trafficking, and therefore they do not benefit from all the safeguards, and also the trafficker continues to work, that company continues to activate. And this is very common. And of course, in our case, that information that is shared with these other categories of practitioners is not shared with the police, because you need the victim's consent for that, with the exception of course, child victims, but this is not the case in our situation. Which means that, on one hand, you had a group of society who feel overwhelmed by how many people ask for help and feel that there is a huge problem, and on the other hand, the police has 0 cases. I think for labor trafficking, we had only 1 prosecution in the last 10 years, and it's where the victims came with all the documents themselves to the police, and they were really active and proactive in following it up, which is not the typical case, I must say. And last but not least, I need to point the systemic discrimination. Often there are multiple levels of discrimination associated with individuals vulnerable for labor trafficking that we are not always considering in our approach. One, they might be discriminated because of their nationality. They are third country nationals. Depending on the country of origin, that can already come with a lot of stigma. Their gender, in some cases, their level of education, which can also reflect in their command of the local language, their knowledge of the law. So when they deal with authorities or with different types of services, they might not be able to properly articulate their situation or their needs, or they might be ashamed, or it might be culturally not appropriate. And this makes it very difficult for them to navigate the system. So even when they seek help, sometimes they are not willing or able to tell the whole story. And obviously the problem is that it would require trust being built over a long period of time when it comes to victim-centric services that would enable, therefore, the story to come out in a longer period and therefore reach a moment when they might be strong enough or in a supported enough for them to be able to go to officially report. But that doesn't always occur because they come in and out of the system, or because the people who interact with them might not be trained to detect the signs of and know where that the story might be bigger than what it looks in the moment. And I wanted to leave you with this, because I find that when we talk with colleagues who work on trafficking, recently I was sitting with somebody who worked on sexual exploitation and told me, can you still do it? Especially after the project we had on child trafficking. She said, because it's demoralizing. There are so many problems. There are so many victims. And when you work in this field, at least in our case, we have people who just come for an advice because they know somebody, they heard somebody, especially when it comes actually to labor trafficking. And it can feel overwhelming. But I try to think that if we try every day, and if we discuss between ourselves, and if you can help even one person with an advice, or put them in contact with somebody, or just build a small network of experts who help, it's still a small way of helping in the long term. So, thank you.
Thank you, Aitana. Thank you, Aitana, for very precisely and usefully painting a little bit the picture of what we're dealing with, the issue, the trends, the complexity of dealing with this. I think what the elements, the data, the information, the considerations you shared with us are demonstrate two things in my head. One is, of course, how serious the issue is, and how important it is to combat it. At the same time, it's also how crucial it is for professionals, for those that are in the position to make a difference, to act upon that, right? And talking about this, I would just now transition or pass to our second speaker. But before that, allow me just to say one thing that I forgot to mention before. We have a small segment of question and answers at the end of the two presentations. So both the persons in presence and those that are attending online are encouraged to just think about potential questions that they might have, and we will have our speakers that would be glad to address them. Now, let me welcome our second speaker, Joren van Ries, from the Dutch National Police. Joren is a senior researcher on human trafficking at the Netherlands National Police, specializing in international criminal networks and technology. He's also visiting professor at the University of Pech. That's the way I think we first met. A committee member of the Dutch Victims of Serious Crimes Compensation Fund, a co-founder of the non-profit Reshape Foundation. Through his work, he fosters cooperation between research, education, and policy, and develops innovative tools to prevent online recruitment and exploitation of young people. Very welcome. Thank you for joining us. He's also a friend of ours, and it's always a pleasure to having you with us.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you, Aitana. So it's hard to follow up on Aitana's presentation, because she's talked a lot about, I think, the practical part and out of the theoretical part that we see about doing research and what we find out. So I'll try to divert it a little bit into the more practical side in the problems that we encounter when we actually try to fight human trafficking out of policing. Which for me is a little bit difficult, because in the Netherlands, actually the fight against labor exploitation is not being led by the Netherlands National Police, but actually by our Dutch Labor Inspectorate, which is a completely different entity, but that doesn't mean that we don't cooperate and we don't try to use the same methods and the same focus into the topic of human trafficking. So I wasn't actively involved in the INVERT project in the way I was in the Disrupt project. So for me, it's a little bit further away from what I'm doing. So when Antonio reached out to me and said, well, maybe you would like to do the keynote, I was like, yeah, okay, but be aware of that. And he gave me the opportunity to change it a little bit and focus on the things that we are working on and to find overlap in those things. And I think that's something that fits nicely within Aitana's presentation as well, as he mentioned, for example, gender, but also discrimination, and all the difficulties that we have encountered in different projects over due time. So thinking about INVERT, we should actually think about the way in how we tackle labor exploitation in this case and how we have to move forward. But before we start, we have to make a certain thing clear, and that's something that Aitana also touched briefly. So when we're talking about human trafficking, I stopped using the term human trafficking. And the reason for that is that we have different types of exploitation. We have sex exploitation, we have labor exploitation, we have criminal exploitation, and we also going into the sphere of forced marriage, forced maternity, etc. But looking at all those different types of crime, one can distinguish all different types of patterns and differences between those relevant elements within the crime itself. So the perpetrators operating in sex exploitation are not the same as operating in labor exploitation. The ones involved in the modus operandi are not the same. Of course, there are connections. So if you're going to be looking at facilitation in money laundering, then most crime networks will have to go to the same facilitators in the same local area. But in general, when we're looking at the victims of these different types of exploitation, as Aitana mentioned, labor exploitation are mostly men in a certain age. Sexual exploitation are mostly women. Criminal exploitation are mostly young men. So they're all different types of victims, and the same goes for perpetration. So if we look at the different backgrounds of the traffickers, they're also not the same. They're completely different types of correlations and connections between those networks, but also the men who make out those networks, or the women, actually. So it's really difficult to talk about human trafficking. We're talking about different types of exploitation, which are all only connected through that exploitation. And then we don't need to be dragged into the swamp of using terminology about human trafficking. It's much easier if we just talk about labor exploitation, or just sexual exploitation, or just criminal exploitation, because that clarifies what we're talking about. And that makes it also much easier, actually, from a practitioner side, to tackle those problems, to be more precise about the determinants or the indicators which are present at that certain profile or type of exploitation. So we can go to the next slide. So basically, the way that we act against human trafficking is all based on the peace paradigm. Now, we all know this was started out as being focusing on prevention, protection, and prosecution. And years later, the American government came with a fourth P called partnerships. And what I really liked about this project is that it also engages that element of partnerships, not actively like we intend to do by reaching out to them, for them taking responsibility, to get them more intrinsic motivated to fight human trafficking. No, we tried to, within INVERT, they try to find the information which is relevant for these organizations to step up. So they can no longer say, well, we didn't know. Yes, you do, because there are risk indicators. We've proven the fact that you are actually contributing to the existence of human trafficking, and therefore you have to act. So there is no longer a reason or a possibility for you to hide from anything that is happening in which your company or your organization is actually facilitating the exploitation of others, it either being labor or sexual or criminal or any other kind. And there's another problem as far as I'm concerned, especially out of policing. Because when we're looking at policing, policing is usually quite reactive in the way that we operate. We are sitting back, we wait for signals or victims to come to us, and then we start up. And every police force all over Europe is quite the same. Yeah? They are very well in what they do, but they act as one. And basically what human trafficking is asking for is like a different approach. It's not acting all at once, but it's like having a different approach towards this specific type of crime. It's not like dealing with a riot or drug trafficking, which gets a lot of a lot of attention and a lot of money out of the EU, which of course is a very, very big problem all over Europe. But it's not as heinous as human trafficking is, because these are human victims, and they are all interconnected also to drug trafficking. So Aitana this morning over breakfast was telling me the situation in some illegal brothels in Malta, where drug trafficking and sexual exploitation go hand in hand. And we have the same signals in almost every country across Europe. So we shouldn't be blind for that part. But within the police, we all have different focus points, different interests. And almost each European country, as a police officer, we have to hand in a certain number of suspects. And the Public Prosecution's Office, as we have some representatives here as well from Hungary, they actually have to have a specific number of convictions or prosecutions. Well, this is all nice. This is making it measurable and assessing the work of the police. But at the same time, this also limits the fight against human trafficking, because it neglects what we actually do for victims, what we do on the preventive side, and what we can actually do on the long term by building up an intelligence position, by taking down entire networks, instead of just looking at a specific perpetrator which has become visible, the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. So in that sense, we have to become more proactive. We have to go out there. We have to find the indicators. We have to actively identify vulnerabilities amongst victims, but also for labor exploitation, about organizations and companies who actually can contribute to the existence of human trafficking. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So it's all about knowing where to look. So I've used some pictures, just randomly. So it's like the needle in the haystack. Yeah, nobody at first knows where to look. So we know about the existence of human trafficking. We know what it is in theory. But what does it look like in practice? It's not like cocaine, which you can just find in like these small packages, like a pony pack or in a small plastic bag or a big bag or something like that, and just test it. You just dip your finger in it, either you taste it, but nowadays we're more professional, so we test it with chemicals. So, and then you know it turns blue, oh, it's cocaine, or red, oh, it's opiates. No, because these are our cocaine, what we try to identify, basically doesn't consider themselves to be cocaine. So they actually prove a different symptom to the cause. So they don't consider themselves to be victims, so they are not willing to cooperate. So they can give you a false positive or a false negative quite easily, because there are interests at hand. Well, we also discussed about housing, for example, or what Aitana mentioned about sick leave. They don't consider themselves to be a victim. They just consider themselves to be, well, working for a better future, ignoring their own benefits. So that makes it really difficult. So what we have to do, we basically have to step out of the shade. So we have to get more light in to make sure that who are those people actually in the background? Who are those in the shadows lurking? Are those victims? Are those traffickers? Or are those the people who actually benefit of labor exploitation? As we all do, because there's always the supply chain in every product that we buy. And we also know that probably there's always some type of exploitation involved. Either it being a mobile phone, a laptop, your clothing, you name it. We know there at some certain stage there probably is some type of exploitation involved. And of course we have to assess the risks which are there. So to what level do we allow this to happen? Or how can we actually use those risks in investigations so that we can be more proactive? So we have to use the knowledge on human trafficking in a better way. And of course, corporate crimes. We have to link it also to the legal entities who benefit most out of labor exploitation. And those should also be on the scope of interest. So not only rescuing or safeguarding the victim, but also the companies who still frequently say, well, we didn't know, we did our best, excuse us, and stuff like that. No, we still have to keep them accountable as well. Only then you can get to change. And if they don't want to cooperate out of goodwill, then we have to enforce them. But they cannot hide any longer in the fact that they didn't know. And I think that the INVERT project shows you with the risk indicator sets that they should know. And they could have known, but they've neglected it. So if you go to the next slide. So from a policing perspective, there are some difficulties, yeah? So we have reactive styles of policing. We have conceptual difficulties in what human trafficking actually is and how it's being used within policing. The different types of exploitation, but also the acceptance of exploitation. We have governance issues in how to use human trafficking and But is still a big factor of impact is the limited knowledge that we have on what's actually happening on human trafficking. So there is not much academic research, especially ethnographic research, done into the topic of human trafficking. There's a lot of legal research done in human trafficking about the definition, about the concept, about the extent and the nature. But talking about victims or talking about crime groups, talking about how they move across Europe, little work has been done. And all the information is still there within policing systems, but that's not widely available. And within the police, usually this is not being researched in a scientific way. But in order to move forward, hence the proactivity part, we need to disclose this information and use it within a scientific way so that we have a better understanding of what's actually happening in the field of human trafficking or the different types of exploitation itself. If you go to the next slide, please. So we need to find a combined approach. So we need to use those traditional policing methods that we apply, but we have to put them in a 2.0 version. We have to move forward, intelligence-led, information-based. We have to do more proactive information gathering. We have to share data with relevant partners, maybe even within the public-private partnerships element. So not only public-public, but also private-public, and likewise. And we have to think about the more preventive ways, because we know that once a victim has fallen victim to one specific type of exploitation, it's really hard to get out of the type of exploitation and also to get rid of the stigma because of the shame and everything. So it's better to prevent than to rescue. And therefore, we need to reach out and apply upstream disruptive programs like preventive measures, but also training of professionals who can recognize it earlier or who can actually reach out to vulnerable groups. So if you go to the next one. So what we have to do is we have to identify and disrupt within the concept of labor exploitation the way that these companies facilitate human trafficking or this type of exploitation. And it's possible because we know within every legal context there are traces, especially if we look into the online component, which is frequently now being used, especially to get people coming over or to reaching out to them or to track or monitor them. So we can just use those digital fingerprints of companies involved within the exploitation. And we can follow the footsteps to identify, then you can just do one click, to identify the people who are being put forward to be recognized. And usually these are also victims, as we can see. And that's something that we have to bear in mind. So we have to look further and further by becoming more proactive and looking further into the possibilities, but we have to be aware of the fact what Aitana also mentioned about discrimination, ethnic profiling. We have to take in consideration that there is still privacy legislation, and amongst private partners there is still a lack in motivation. And then we go to the final slide. So, but the first thing that we need to do, and it all starts with this, is we have to take the step forward. We have to get out of the darkness and move towards the light, and only knowledge can bring us there. So that's something I would like to give to you, and I think that this project actually shows us the way to the door, and now it's all up to you professionals or theoretics, to actually take the next step and bring us forward. So thank you all very much, and I hope you have a nice day.
Thank you, Jorn. Thank you very much for this. And thank you, Aitana, again. I found particularly relevant reference to the proactive approach that needs to be had versus the kind of reactive, conventional, or quite traditional approach that has been used. But also the element of partnerships, because I think the very element that I think characterizes and has strengthened the effort that we have made is the partnership that we have, the diversity, and how different actors from, in this case, civil society, academia, and then the more operational partners were able to collaborate and work together in that sense. Also, thank you for indicating or pointing the way forward, and perhaps to thank you for giving us a sense of the difficulties, complexity on different levels, but also the kind of approach that is needed in order to face the challenges that the issue we're discussing are posing to all of us. I would like now to take a couple of minutes, or even more if we have, if we want, just to open the floor to everyone for questions to our keynote speakers. And both those that are attending in person, as I said before, and that online are invited to ask questions should they have any, of course. Perhaps I can break the ice, right? Yes, it's often the case, isn't it? So perhaps linking to what Joran was saying, I have a question for you, Joran. And you were mentioning partnerships, and partnerships is, everyone talks about this, and it can be like a very kind of important concept, but at the same time, it can, like when it comes to like practical terms or concreteness, perhaps that is often lacking, right? So perhaps one question, because I think your very position, your very role as an academic and or a researcher that is working within the police and is collaborating with several different stakeholders at the national and international level. I'm sure you have some good examples of partnerships that if you look back at what you have done over the last X number of years, you're thinking, okay, those are two very good examples of how things can become concrete, like how partnerships can turn into, actual concrete results. Do you have perhaps some examples to share with us?
You want me to? Okay, perfect,
Yeah, no.
thanks. So, well, I think the best example, especially out of the Netherlands, is the fact that we motivated banks to become more active in money laundering, in the fight against money laundering. But they were not intrinsically motivated. So at a certain stage, they were fined almost €1 billion. And that's the moment that they actually started setting up these FCC, FEC departments, which are monitoring the transactions. And I think that even though this cost banks a lot of money, and they still have a lot of profit, but the people working in those departments, I find highly motivated to actually fight these types of crimes, and especially the ones working in the fight against human trafficking, to identify human trafficking. But they still struggle with the identification of certain patterns. Yeah, so labor exploitation is probably the more easy one, because you know certain payments and then deductions immediately or transfers. But in sexual exploitation it's more difficult, and criminal exploitation even worse. So you have to feed them the indicators in which they can actually use. And one of the things that they gave back to me is, okay, well, we report a lot to the financial intelligence units. And that goes to the police, or we talk to the police, but we never hear back from what our actions actually did. So we set up this cooperation with several banks actually to give them feedback on the work that has been done on the information that they've given us. And also which cases would actually go to court, so they can see the background and the value of the work that they are doing. And I think that the next step we need to take is basically approach especially companies which are in the social media branch to do the same thing, because they can actually stop exploitation or recruitment for exploitation at a very early stage, and they don't. And I think they need to step up as well.
Thank you very much for this very interesting point and very interesting example. I'm looking at the audience and to see whether we have any questions. Yes, I see one in the back. Thank you. And perhaps you can specify if it's for one or the other speaker as well. If
okay, thank you. I'm Juliana Huszár from Hungary, the Prosecutor General's Office of Hungary. And my question is to both of the our specialists. It's about the product of the INVERT project. What do you think? How can these tools can be spread in the member states, as I think, and to refer to my own country, it is not the academics and not the practitioners who decide about the use of these tools. What can, for example, the European Union or the European Labour Authority do to spread this tool? Because we, on our own, cannot do this. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I see the microphone coming your way.
Should we do both questions and then answer?
Yes, we can take another one from online. Thank you.
So we have Barbara Kovacs from online. Thank you very much for joining. They've asked, I am Barbara Kovacs from CPOL. I'd like to hear your opinion on the importance of training. They offer on-site and exchange trainings for law enforcement, so would just like to hear more on that front.
I'll start with the last because it's linked to the first question. I think single discipline training is important, but I think there is where the problem also lies. And I'm going to make a quick analogy to the project we had on digital evidence. We always think that digital evidence should only be taught to law enforcement and prosecutors because they are the ones who are using it most. But actually, a lot of colleagues from civil society and victim support services said that it would be great if they would know what to tell the victims in order to preserve when they exit an exploitative situation, so that if they have that material or they might be aware that it's important for them if they can take a mobile phone or not alter information. So when it comes to training, I think in order to also bridge that information sharing gap that I was mentioning, I think one of the most important is try to, and I'm linking it to what Jorn said with the banks giving feedback. It's important that training is done throughout so that it doesn't feel for social workers or others that they send information to the police and then it disappears in this black hole or from the police to the prosecution's office. So I think this is something that is, people forget how important it is for that to come as a cycle to tell them that is important information. Now, linked to the adoption of tools, and this is something that we struggle a lot in our projects when we develop a tool, because of course there's procurement that is done for public authorities in a certain way. But I think it is still possible to breach that gap, because we've had a lot of success we had 2 previous projects on evidence where in the end the European Union actually took on board a system that was developed in one of the projects and implemented as a standard at EU level. So I think the idea of when a tool, and we recently actually had a similar case when we developed in a Horizon project the methodology that Interpol is now using because they found it better than what they were currently using for detecting migrant smuggling. So I don't think it's impossible. I think it is perfectly possible to do, but it does require a lot of effort, and I think actually the academia can play a more important role, or at least we try in Malta, to build the bridges, to invite practitioners into our home, because our home is more neutral than others, and invite policymakers and tell them, look, there's this tool, it's really useful, talk to the ministers. So we do a lot of the dialogue work because we are neutral and we're not seen as a partisan in the debate between authorities. So I think this is also something to consider if you're working in a sphere like ours. Can you do more in helping others? It's not linked to our job per se, but we use our neutrality as a bridge to force people together.
Thank you. I'll start off with the second question as well. I think it's quite difficult in a training concept because everything changes so quickly. So once we've identified certain patterns or certain phenomena to happen, then the ones behind it will know about the things happening, and then they will alter their methodology. So for the training, I would rather say that we need, especially out of CPO, where you have police training, I would specifically train towards being more agile, more flexible, and being more adaptive to the situations that you encounter and knowing how to deal with it. And that usually starts with having a proper intelligence or information base to work on. And having specialized analysts to actually use that information to guide you through operational efforts. And this doesn't happen everywhere in a proper way. And then for the first question, how to make it more sustainable, I think that's a really good question and really difficult one, because this is into the institutional background of the partners who are relevant. And then, well, my personal view and my personal experience usually is that the people who need to make these decisions have a lot of knowledge about money, but not about the topic of human trafficking. And that's not a good combination. So I think that they should be more open to what experts actually have to say and about the testing results of certain projects to implement them, rather than using certain projects because it's hyped, or because they have sometimes personal interest, or neglecting products which are tested and proven its value, just because at a certain time there is not enough money and they have to make a different decision and everything. So yeah, it's up to the institutions, and the EU itself is also such an institution, I'm afraid, which makes it really difficult. Sorry for the negative, but that's reality, I think.
It's part of reality indeed, and thank you very much. Just looking for signals regarding time, if we have time for another question, or if we, no, I've been told that I have to be very, very adamant and rigid and go ahead. And so I will do. What we prepared for today, we were thinking about how we could make also this morning a little bit interactive, right? And as I mentioned before, we want to collect also your feedback, your views, and your personal experience when it comes to the very topic we're discussing. So we put together 3 engagement exercises. I will now start the first one. You have in front of you, I'm sure that you're familiar with the system, but you have a QR code that you can scan with your phone. You're all invited, both those that are attending in person and online. That will give you access to Slido, and in particular to one introductory question we wanted to ask. So take a second to scan it. If you have any problems, let us know, but we can help. So we have been talking quite recurrently. Excuse me? Can you try again, please? I'm looking at, yes, it should be all right in a second. It should. Let's see. Okay, so please, but I think we can already show the question, so that there's no confusion in that sense. Okay, so I think everyone should be able to read the first question. And just as a small note, we have been talking recurrently, of course, that's the topic of the day, about identifications of victims, identification of chains of trafficking and exploitation. So I think the question is, in your experience, what are the main challenges in identifying victims of trafficking in case of labor exploitation? So we understand that most of the participants work in the field and work daily on this, but we can also have participants, both online and in person, that perhaps study this phenomenon, study the issue, right? But I have this understanding. So we would like to, we heard a bit from our keynote speakers, but we would like to integrate what was said with your own experience, direct experience on that. So answers are coming together. So some of the things that are being said is that there's a thin line between victims and workers accepting hard conditions. The main challenge is that victims don't feel themselves like victims, so they don't want to cooperate. So that's very interesting, because I think the very risk assessment on victims is looking for clear indicators that allow you to go beyond this, let's say, this obstacle in that sense. Then again, victims do not consider themselves as such, not reporting the crimes. That hasn't been mentioned much, but indeed that's another element. People are not aware that are being exploited. That's another element. So a lot of has to do with lack of understanding, lack of awareness regarding what is happening, or the thin line, the let's say the blurred kind of area, gray area between working and being exploited as well. The synergy between partners, so going back to what Joren was saying about partnerships as well. We have privacy issues. Workers may hesitate to share their experience due to fear. Lack of willingness of authorities. I lost that part, but we'll, yes, to address this issue of fear and mistrust among traffic victims leading to underreporting, not realizing they're victims. Lack of a robust legal framework with procedures and sanctions. Very interesting as well. Thank you for this contribution. Fear of being punished or deported. So not knowing that what they are experiencing is illegal. Victims do not consider, again, themselves as such as victims. Often the undocumented elements, victims are often undocumented, have fear of authorities. So I think these are not a surprise to any of us. I believe that I can safely say that this knowledge, this understanding very much informed the work that we have been doing and shaped it in a way that I think we will be able to show you in a second. Just to read a few more. Labor exploitation is often hidden in private homes and work sites, so practical, concrete limits. Victims often don't feel exploited if they're paid. Business interests are more important than tackling THP. So thank you very much for these contributions. I think it is very useful, and it integrates quite nicely with what was discussed before. Now, I was talking about answers because that's the time where what we have been mentioning in terms of solutions will be started to be showed, right? And I will now invite Clara Rondani from Transcrime to join us to provide a bit of a presentation on the INVERT project itself, its objectives, but more importantly, on the work that has been done when it comes to the process of developing these indicators, the risk factors that were then operationalized in indicators that we mentioned before, but also the very outcomes. So just FYI, a heads up, we will have a second engagement exercise after this presentation to ask you whether those very indicators make sense, if they are comprehensive, if you think they address those very issues that you see there, that we got in terms of contribution or concerns or recognize obstacles. So Clara from Transcrime, please join us for this.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you to all the participants, both here and online. It's a pleasure for me to present the final outcomes of the INVERT project after 2 years of work. So INVERT stands for Identifying Companies and Victims in the Exploitation Phase to Disrupt the Financial Business Model of Adult and Child Labor Trafficking. So we can go to the next slide, please. So just some background. We are seeing here the data from Eurostat. We see that labor exploitation, trafficking for labor exploitation is rising in the European Union. We don't know, as Aitana correctly mentioned, if this is due to an increase in victims or if law enforcement is improving in identifying the victims, but it's really relevant that now victims of labor trafficking are now basically the same amount as the victims for sexual exploitation. So we can go to the next slide, please. So traffickers have created a system to profit from labor exploitation. It's a system that is able to generate significant profits through what we can call and through what has generally been called a real business model. So researchers and policymakers' attention is increasing in this topic, but there are still some gaps of knowledge that we try to address in the INVERT project. The INVERT project specifically focuses on the exploitation phase, which is a phase where victims are particularly vulnerable. It is particularly relevant, especially also from the point of view of the employers, because it is here that they can create profit. So what we focus on, especially in the INVERT project, is exploitation within apparently clean and legal entities. We can go to the next slide, please. We have already said some things about the consortium. You can see here that there are different partners, both from law enforcement, academia, prosecutors' offices, an NGO. So this was a very proficient consortium. I'm really happy of the outcomes that you will see in a few moments, because this is the outcome of 2 years of very intense work. We have already said about the objectives of the INVERT project. We try to improve the identification of cases of labor exploitation by leveraging data. And we also try to strengthen international cooperation and knowledge sharing among different entities. So next slide, please. The two main outputs that INVERT has produced are this one that were already mentioned. We developed a prototype suite of two risk assessment tools, one focused on the legal companies and one focused on potential victims. And we also developed some training modules that were disseminated in the partner institutions, not only on the use of the INVERT suite, but more broadly on the topic of labor trafficking, the trends in labor trafficking, and the legal frameworks, both national and international, to address this topic. Next slide, please. So this is the approach we followed. We started by identifying a set of risk indicators for adult and child labor exploitation, both at the company and victim level. We then operationalized these indicators to make them actually measurable, and we included them in the prototype INVERT suite. Then, once the prototype suite was ready, we trained the partner institutions, and we allowed them to access the tool to validate our findings and to give us their feedback in order to improve this tool. Next slide, please. So now we come to the risk indicators for labor trafficking and exploitation. This is the methodology we followed. We started with the support of our partners from Carabinieri, especially. We started by identifying a list of factors that increase the risk of being involved in labor exploitation, both for companies and for people. We started, after drafting the initial list, we tried to assess them through a literature review, through international reports, in order to add relevant indicators that were missing. And last, we operationalized these broad factors into measurable indicators. So during our work, we identified a common scheme in several of the cases that we analyzed in our work. We focused on supply chains because, especially since the beginning, this is a very relevant topic. We found out through our engagement with partners that it is very difficult to uncover exploitation that is hidden in supply chains. It is often hidden at the bottom of very long and complicated supply chains. So this is a common scheme that we have found in several cases. We generally have a big client company that operates in a sector where outsourcing is generally common and accepted. Below, this client company relies on a network of direct suppliers. Among these suppliers, there are, of course, legal and clean companies, but there might also be some companies that have the only purpose of hiding additional sub-tiers of suppliers. So these are actually fictitious shell companies that have the only purpose of masking exploitation hidden at the very bottom of the supply chain. And at the bottom, we have the actual places of abuse. So these are generally small companies that need to cut costs as much as possible in order to be profitable, to remain active in the market. And so they do this very often at the expenses of workers. Next slide. Okay, let's start with company level risk indicators. We operationalized the characteristics of companies that increase the risk of being involved in labor exploitation. So we identified some sort of red flags. Of course, these need to be assessed more in detail because each case is unique. So we don't plan to have all the cases, all the indicators possible. But we, as you will see, we have collected a good number of indicators, and we divided them into 3 macro categories that you can see here. So next slide, please. So the first category is territory and sector. These are the indicators linked to companies' main activity and the geographical location. We have links with high-risk jurisdiction. So we consider that the risk increases if the company has links with some jurisdiction that are considered at high risk of labor exploitation because they have some vulnerabilities at the macro level, geopolitical level. So for instance, this is the reason behind the Uyghur legislation that is in place in the US. We also operationalize the sector because there are some sectors, and we know that based on international reports, that are more at risk of labor exploitation. These are especially the sectors where labor is especially unskilled. They rely a lot on migrants' labor, so there is an inherent risk in these sectors. And last, in this macro category, we have anomalous geographic concentration. This is a bit different from the other 2 indicators. We consider that the risk increases if a company is registered at an address where a high number of other companies are registered. This is because this might suggest bogus fraudulent schemes where companies are registered, but they are not actually active. They just are incorporated in order to hide the use of additional companies. So next slide, please. Now we come to the second macro category, which relates to ownership and company history. So these are all the indicators that signal a sort of lack of transparency. We don't have enough information to say that the company is operating in legality. There are a number of indicators in this category. So let me just move a little bit as I cannot see the names. I can take the microphone. Perfect. So we have high-risk legal form. There are some legal forms that are subject to less financial requirements. They are not obliged to publish their financial data. So this, of course, increases decreases their transparency. We don't know enough about their financial structure. So we consider this as a first risk factor. We have then the lack of shareholding information. So, of course, if we don't know exactly who the beneficial owner is, who the shareholders are, this increases the risk. We have recent incorporation of or short lifespan. This is something that we see in different criminal schemes, not only in labor exploitation, but there are very often some companies that open and closes after, for instance, 1 year of activity. This might be legal because the company was not profitable and it closed, but it also might suggest an opening and closure behavior, strategic opening and closure. So the company opens, they try to take as much profit as they can without paying taxes, without paying social security, and then they close and open basically the same company with another name, with maybe another person as manager or BO, but technically, even if they are formally two different companies, we see that the structure is actually the same. Then we have links with bankrupt companies. This is related basically to the same reason. A company may go bankrupt strategically in order to open another one and to avoid the payment of taxes, and change in management and change in names, which are, again, connected to the same reason. We can go on. The third category is financial risk. These are all based on financial data. We have excessive outsourcing. As I said, outsourcing is a legal and common practice, but it can also be used as a strategy in order to outsource all the activities not strictly related to the core business, sometimes by relying on fictitious company, and to increase the complexity of the supply chain and to make oversight much more difficult for law enforcement. We have low personnel costs, as these might suggest possible undeclared work, bogus self-employment schemes, or inactive companies. And last, we have a composite indicator that measures the lack of real economic activity. So, as I said before, there are some companies that are incorporated just for the purpose of supplying cheap labor. They actually have no production department, they have no means of production, they cannot be actually operational. So these empty companies are used strategically to subcontract some activities and make oversight more difficult again. So we operationalize those indicators on a scale from 1 to 5. Let's just move here. Okay, thank you. You will see later how they are operationalized and incorporated in the INVERT suite. We can move to the victim level risk indicators that we operationalized into different areas of risk. Of course, when we deal with victims, this is a much more sensitive topic than dealing with companies. Of course, if for companies, we can operationalize the risk as a sort of number. This is a very risky operation to do with persons because, of course, we don't want to flag persons as potential victim, not potential victim. This is something that needs to be left to the persons doing the evaluation, interacting with the person, checking all the signs, and as we already said, each case is unique, so the evaluation needs to be very, very careful. But we collected all the information that needs to be taken into consideration by professionals. We organized them into these risk areas. So if we can go on, we can see all the indicators we included. So first area is personal information. So we believe that police officers, but not only, all the specialists interacting with potential victims should take into consideration the information on the victim, so age, the country of origin, the availability of real documents. As Aitana mentioned, there are some cases where the victims have documents, but they are actually fake, they are forged, especially to make them obtain some travel authorization. We also consider some indicators regarding the appearance, both physical and emotional, of the potential victim. So if the victim or potential victim presents signs of abuse, of physical abuse, of mistreatment, if they look under stress or scared to talk with someone else that they don't know, and also if there is a third person that is present and tries to speak for the potential victim. Second area, migration process and that bondage situation. INVERT focuses on the exploitation phase, we have said, but it is very important to collect also the information about the process that brought the person to the destination country. So reasons for migration, so if the victims was joining family members in the destination country, or if they were looking for a job, or if they were promised a job, these should all be information that need to be taken into consideration. How the travel was organized, if they organized by themselves, or if instead they relied on a sort of agency or a third person that offered to organize the travel, for instance, by making them pay a price that is much higher than the market price, and so this lead to that bondage situation, because sometimes the victims need to pay more than they are generally supposed to pay, and that leads to that they need to repay generally through their working or through other favors that they need to do to the traffickers. And coercion to obtain access to the travel. Aitana mentioned about the linkages between sexual exploitation and labor exploitation. The victims, in order to have access to the travel, to be brought to what they think that it is a safe country, they are coerced into doing something, criminal acts, sexual favors to the traffickers. So this is also very, very relevant to take into consideration. Of course, it is not always easy to obtain information on this because, as everyone also in the chat mentioned, the victims are often reluctant to speak. Third category, employment and working conditions. So, of course, all the information related to the work they are performing. The job sectors, as we mentioned, there are some sectors that are more at risk because they rely on unskilled labor. The lack of a valid contract. This means that sometimes the victims do not have a contract at all. So that's basically undeclared work. But sometimes they also have a contract that maybe they don't understand because it's in a language that they do not speak. It's under a law that they absolutely don't know. They don't have anyone to ask for help to. So not only the lack of a contract, but also the lack of a valid contract is an important sign, and the lack of understanding of the contract implications. Then, of course, working hours and payments, also if they match with what is stated in the contract, if they report to be subject to threats and violence in the workplace, and also we should collect, not we because we do not interact as academics with victims, but all the professionals doing that should also ask questions on the freedom they have in the workplace. So if they are free to change the job, if they are free to take breaks, free to speak with colleagues, and we can go on. Last two categories, housing and cultural mechanisms. Many times the victims cannot freely choose the accommodation. They might sleep in the workplace. This is particularly risky also because they are often forced to sleep and eat near chemical substances. So this is something that needs to be, of course, taken into consideration. And also if they are forced to live, for instance, with co-workers or other people that they do not share personal links with, but it's easier for the employer and the trafficker to exploit them in this way. Also, if they have access to personal items, so passport in the first place, because of course, if they don't have personal documents, if they don't have access to passport, they are not allowed to leave and to move freely. If they have access to credit cards and bank accounts, as sometimes the exploiters often, they sometimes retain this for the victim, which means that they do not have access to the money they earn. Then the lack of contacts with family and friends. Some victims reported that they were not allowed to have contacts with family in their home country, but also that they were not allowed to visit places in the community they were living in. They were not allowed to go to church. They were not allowed to go to the supermarket. And last, the lack of space and hygiene conditions. Sometimes the victims, there are plenty of cases, I believe that most of you already know some of them, where victims were forced to sleep in very poor hygiene and safety conditions. Last category is minors. Of course, minors is a category that is particularly at risk, more vulnerable per se. So all cases involving minors should be treated as potentially at risk. So besides all what we have said before regarding adults, we have also collected a few information that is specifically related to minors. So if they completed school or if they are enrolled in school, if they are employed in family business. Why this? Because this means that they have personal links with the employers, making them vulnerable, making it more difficult to leave the exploiter. Last, episodes of substance abuse, which again increases the vulnerability. It's of course a vulnerability factor if they had some episodes in the past of substance abuse. So I believe this is all regarding the risk indicators. I hope that I was on time. Perfect. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you very much. You were perfectly on time, and you were also very, very clear. And I think we spent the first hour and a half talking about what we will be presenting. So now we're starting to get into the details and the concreteness of what we have done. In particular, the process behind the development of these indicators, and finally what these indicators look like. Now, we would like to know from you, again, from those that are in person and those that are online the same, whether these very indicators are correct, solid, comprehensive, relevant. And we have this second engagement exercise that I would start. So same as before, please, if you have the page open from before, you can use it, or you can rescan the QR code, and we have a few questions for you. As Clara presented, we have indicators that are company focused, and then other indicators that are victims focused. So we have 4 questions in total, 2 and 2 for each of the 2 categories of indicators. We have here, the question is if there is any indicator among the company-focused ones that you find particularly important. So this is for us to understand whether there are some that might be less relevant. I see that there is a bit of a ranking that is already taking shape. We give it a little bit of time. This is very interesting information for us to collect so that we can also let's say, compare and contrast what we have done with the views that you have, that those that really work in the field think. In particular, I can see that if you can go up a little bit, if it's possible. So we have low personal costs, yes, lack of real economic activity, links with high-risk jurisdiction, lack of shareholding information, links with bankrupt companies, changing name, that are ranking as the most relevant. The economic element stands out in that sense. Perhaps one as quite expected, but one thing that I perhaps to complement this answer, I would like to ask if there is anything that stands out as missing. We think that we have been quite thorough and comprehensive, but that's what we think, and that's what we're here for, also to hear from all of you if that's indeed the case. Can you think of any indicators that are, let's say, very clearly missing from what we have put together here? And this silence is also an option, so it's good news for us. All right, so I think we can transition to the second one that is still supposed to be on the company-focused ones. And in particular, yes, indeed, it is asking whether there is anything that you find not particularly relevant or, let's say, less relevant than others. And we're still in the company-focused domain, let's say. Of course, we're hoping for something here to be high, for a high number or none, but that's the purpose of it, to really try to see whether there is anything that is blatantly wrong or misplaced. But it doesn't seem to be the case. We see now high-risk legal form or lack of shareholding transparency that perhaps is less relevant than others. Give it 20 more seconds to see, to allow for everyone to finish. I see that it is oscillating, it is swinging up and down. But still, it seems to be the one indicator that has been identified as the one that perhaps requires some considerations in that sense. Thank you for this again, and then I would just move to the next one. Thank you. Where we do the same exercise with the victim-focused indicators. So the question is there any indicator among the victim-focused ones that you find particularly important? So now we're back to important, right? So first of the questions, the next one will be about what is not relevant, right? So we see that important are considered working hours, payments, and threats and violence as indicators of potential cases of exploitation. What else is considered important? Travel organization costs, debt, bondage, or coercion to obtain travel as another element, another indicator of potential exploitation. Again, working hours, payments, and threats and violence are standing out from the others. The way the person appears, this visible signs of abuse, but also signs of distress or potential trauma are also seemingly relevant indicators that should be considered. We see here, and lack of freedom, as Clara was explaining, the odd signs when it comes to lack of normal kind of routine or way of working that might indicate that as well. But I will just give it a few more seconds, and then we just move to the last questions. I see that also lack of freedom is still growing. And the last question is still about victims-focused indicators, but is just to understand whether there is, if we can just go to the next one, please, to the next question. Thank you. If there is any indicator among the victims-focused ones that you have listed below, of course, that you find not particularly relevant. Same exercise as before. Thank you for this. Okay, starts being, we start to see a quite reassuring none. There is availability or validity of documents and possession of personal items, passport, bank account, ID. So as an indicator that might be slightly weaker in pointing towards cases of labor exploitation when it comes to victims. And I think we have results that were quite expected as well. Country of origin and reasons for migration, also ranking the same way as the previous one. The availability, validity of documents, possession of personal items. Okay, thank you for this. I think I am also respecting the time. I guess I'm seeing reassuring signs. Now, this also enters us smoothly into our third engagement exercise to collect your feedback, and this is the last one, I promise, on what you have just seen and listened to. And so I would like to have your feedback on the features of the INVERT tool. I asked Clara to stick around because she's the master of this, and so she will be running, or she will be commenting this next exercise. And this is also the moment where I'll just pass on the microphone to her just to co-host the rest of the event. So thank you very much, Clara, for this. And again, you have the QR code. You can you're now used to how to do it. You can just open. We have the first questions. And Clara, back to you.
Thank you. So this is the last question we ask you. Feel free to add all the information you think is relevant for us, as it can help us improve the tool further. So no fear, we are not asking you to be kind. So feel free to fill it in. I see that we have some answers, I think, but we cannot see the outcomes of the survey. I don't know if it's correct. So in case you had some questions or wanted to add something, as we cannot actually see the scores here. So in case you have anything to say, I think you can.
There was just one point which I came back to at the final of the questions. You want to use that one? Yeah, there was just one point on the final of the 3 questions. So going over your overview of the indicators and everything. There are also a lot of indicators which basically can give you some insight in money laundering. So non-existing parts of the companies or anything else like that. So do you also have taken into consideration either using the INVERT tool also to identify money laundering or fake shareholdings, or to make sure that there is no overlap between those two to assess possible victimization of labor exploitation?
Yes, we see those 2 problems, labor exploitation and money laundering, as quite connected. They are, of course, not the only ones that can pop out from the dashboard, because it's also connected to frauds. It's also made to see which companies present signs, for instance, of shell companies, which is a very common problem in money laundering schemes, in fraud schemes. So, of course, there are some indicators that can be applied in a variety of cases. For instance, the lack of transparency of shareholding information, the shell company, they can all be applied to these different different types of crimes. There are some more specific indicators, for instance, the sector, the risk of labor exploitation in some sectors is not the risk of money laundering in that sector. So we see that as a bit different. But of course, the tool is can be applied to a variety of cases with some modifications. We think that it could be also be used in some other operational settings. So we see that as quite interconnected. Also in the cases I have presented, there were many cases in which tax crimes, tax irregularities, fraud were all crimes that were uncovered within the labor exploitation scheme. So they are interconnected, and in case we want to apply it to a very specific settings, of course some modifications would be needed.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
In the Netherlands, for example, we see a lot of women who are within sexual exploitation, a lot of Romanian women, unfortunately. So, and we see that they are also being forced to set up a lot of limited, so in Dutch, BV, and also across the country itself, and they change quite a lot. So a lot of the indicators that you've mentioned, like ownership and name changing and stuff like that, come back. But we also know that they are non-existing companies, so they're
Yes.
all registered at the same address, which is basically not an address for the business.
Yes.
And they are only used for money laundering, but still highly connected to the sexual exploitation.
Yes.
Because it's only used to launder the money and also to keep more pressure on the victim and to keep her more vulnerable.
Yes, I think that is something not particularly related to sexual exploitation, because of course the framework is different from the Netherlands, but that is something that we have observed in labor exploitation. So we have the results of the questions. We think that we find that the network analysis is something that is particularly appreciated, so that's good to know. We will work more probably on the other to make them even more relevant. So thank you everyone for the feedback. I think we have a quite clear result for this question. Least helpful, that's a good result again for us, as you think that most of them are relevant. Geographical links and street view is something that is mentioned, and I think this is quite expected. Of course, this is not some information that you can only access through the INVERT suite, so this is a good result as well. And I don't know if there are any other questions. The third one maybe was the one okay. If you could improve the INVERT suite, what would be your suggestion? Include additional data sources. I agree with that. Of course, including additional data is something that is generally useful. In case you want to add more details on that, as I said at the beginning, feel free to contact me to discuss with us a bit more. I think that improvement, of course, is needed. We are at a good point, I think. That's a good start, a good result of the project, but in case you have more detailed suggestions, you want to know more about the suite, want to have more information, that is highly appreciated. Thank you. Okay. Now I think we can have a needed break. So for those who are present here, you can have some coffee there. And we, I don't know the time. So 11:50. It's 11:50. 11:50, we will be back. Thank you.